Mr. Chairman. Mr. O'Brien, so the BLM has held just 2 oil and gas lease sales in Wyoming since Joe Biden took office. The Mineral Leasing Act requires quarterly lease sales, meaning there should have been 10 sales under President Biden so far. So I have a chart up here that shows the average amount of acres leased, and it's in millions of acres, by previous presidents. Well, you can see Joe Biden right there at the bottom is defying the law and has wrecked the leasing process. Can you talk about the impact that this BLM refusal to follow the law has had on the state of Wyoming?
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. Thanks for the question. Happy to do so. I want to answer it in 2 ways. Number one, just the fiscal impact to the state of Wyoming. I mentioned how important oil and gas is to our economy and to Wyoming's revenues. The 2 lease sales that the administration has offered, the first brought in $14 million, the second brought in $13 million. At that rate, you've mentioned that they've missed 10. Wyoming should have been receiving somewhere, or Wyoming and the federal government should have been receiving around $130 million. So there's a quantifiable dollar amount impact for sure. The second part that I want to emphasize, Senator, is the issue of leasing for Wyoming has everything to do with the exploration, not necessarily the production. I was so encouraged to hear Senator Manchin differentiate between leasing and permitting in that way. Wyoming is an exploratory field still. It's different from other fields in that sense. We need leasing in order to explore for new fields. That's what attracts companies to Wyoming, is that exploratory nature. And as we cut off leasing and cut that down, we choke off the ability to explore for new resources, and that hurts us in the long term.
So did the failure to lease federal lands result in less oil and gas production, or simply cause companies to move elsewhere?
Right. In terms of the expense and in terms of leasing, if companies have production in other basins, of course, Colorado or New Mexico or other places, they fight internally for capital, and the barriers that BLM puts in front of Wyoming puts us at a competitive disadvantage.
So, Mr. Melito, do you see the same reaction from companies in offshore oil and gas sectors?
Yeah, the offshore sector is highly competitive. It makes up about 30% of total global oil production, which is 100 million barrels a day. And these are projects that they're competing on a global level. You're looking at places like Guyana, Southeast Asia, the North Sea. It's very difficult and challenging to continue to make investments in a region like the Gulf of Mexico that is highly prospective when you have uncertainty and you don't have the predictability that you might have in another part of the world. So the money could definitely leave, and you put those jobs at risk.
Yeah. So, Mr. Obermehl, you talked about activists having challenged essentially every oil and gas lease sale that BLM has held in Wyoming. They include lease sales even held by the Obama administration. The lawsuits are often filed years after the leases have been issued. These groups ask judges to cancel leases that are valid existing contracts between BLM and private companies. How do these lawsuits affect your members' ability to produce on federal land?
In some cases, Senator Barrasso, in some cases it completely stops the ability to produce. Currently there are 2,573 leases under litigation in Wyoming. In some cases, in many cases, it has prompted the BLM to, as I mentioned before, self-enjoin. But perhaps one of the most egregious examples of that is legally the leases offered in the fourth quarter of 2020. The legal process was completed, the leases were available, but for fear of litigation, the BLM has yet to actually issue those leases from Q4 2020 as a result of litigation threats.
So to make that point, since Joe Biden has taken office, BLM has decided to stop issuing permits on oil and gas leases that are under litigation. That's what you just said. So often BLM has made this decision even though environmental activists have not actually won a ruling in court. So as a result, companies have not been able to develop hundreds of thousands of acres in Wyoming based on this decision. As a matter of basic fairness, should environmental activists get what they want without actually winning in court?
Mr. Chairman, it does defy a little bit of explanation. Obviously access to courts is very, very important, but the process should play out, and there should not be an incentive to continually to file lawsuits and then have an agency self-enjoin during that process. The process should play out, and it should play out fairly.
So, Mr. Melito, the Biden administration set a goal to deploy 30 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. I'll note that offshore wind requires over 33,000 pounds of minerals per megawatt of capacity. It's about 12 times the amount of minerals that natural gas needs per megawatt. Does the United States have policies in place to support the development of mineral resources that offshore wind energy needs?
Well, we lack a comprehensive strategy for securing the critical minerals needed for our energy future. We need to work together to make sure that China does not remain the dominant player in this space. We have companies that can do offshore mineral mining, and they would be helped by the administration if they stepped up and played a role in getting them access to some of these areas around the world where they're trying to deploy their technologies to have a U.S. company in that space. And you're very well aware, the state of Wyoming has various critical minerals, and the BLM, of course, has a lot of jurisdiction over that prevents that kind of development. But SPUR Act has provisions in there to address a lot of this, and we need to work together to develop this comprehensive strategy so that the U.S. becomes a leader in critical mineral mining.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.